Wow. Yeah, this is a tough one.
I love putting my guests in moral conundrums on a live stream.
Yeah. I'm glad.
What's my damn problem? Hi, welcome to Podcast Simulator. I'm with my special guest, Ben Hosley from the podcast Blank Check. He's a producer, engineer, editor. He's done many roles. And I've known Ben for, I would say, 3 to 4 years closely. I've known of Ben for years, 7, 8 years probably. But feel lucky to call him a friend, thanks to our mutual friend, Harry Nelson, who introduced us.
Yep.
And you live in New York, and you would, whenever you would come out to LA, you would hang out with Harry. I see Harry a lot, and he was like, hey, you guys should meet. So then we went to some bar a couple of years ago.
Right.
And I had so much fun chatting pods with you that it became...
It's just fun to dish.
It is, man.
We work in this very niche world, which I would say is specifically comedy talk show, world.
That, and we run by similar crowds. We have hosts that are friends. But we also, I think, you and I have very specific similar experiences where we work on kind of like a comedy chat shows. Yours is, a little more intense, several hours discussion, movie podcast.
It's insane. We put out a 4-hour episode.
It's wild. Was this the one that was the Twin Peaks? Did you guys do a Twin Peaks episode that was very long? I heard about.
Well, so we're doing right now, we cover directors' filmographies.
Yep.
We're doing David Lynch. The 4-hour episode was about Mulholland Drive, which is, a very important film.
Yeah.
And so I knew we were going to go long, but it 4 hours is a little absurd.
It is.
But the fans like it.
It's a lot.
And as long as the fans keep coming back, then I'll suffer through 4 hours of that.
Of madness. Before we get into today, I want to talk, I don't really know your early days. Was Blank Check the first pod you produced, or were you working on other shows? What was your introduction to the podcast world, Mr. Ben?
I had started a show with a friend. At this point, I think it was probably 11 or 12 years ago.
Yeah.
And none of that exists anymore, by the way. It was pretty bad, but it was a good sort of way to just experiment. And we were doing sketches and kind of just doing our own version of The Best Show with Tom Sharpling.
Great. Yep.
I feel like that was the influence there. But it was great training. He had a background in recording, so he showed me a lot of stuff of just mic etiquette and showed me how to edit. So it was a great sort of set some great foundation for me.
Does this person work in podcast?
No. They
I feel like I met this. Do they live in LA now, or did I make that up? I feel like I met someone at a birthday party that you were like, I did sketch comedy with this person 13 years ago, but maybe it's a different person.
That is a friend, because different person, but at this time I was also pursuing comedy writing and performing. I was doing stand-up. I was in a sketch group. So I was, trying out a little bit of everything at that moment. And after doing this show with my friend, truly maybe 3 or 4 months, and it kind of fizzled out, I was like, I want to keep doing this in some capacity, right?
Cool.
Like this was the nascent days,
Yeah.
There wasn't a glut of programming like there is now.
Yep.
And so I ended up getting a internship at the Creek in the Cave, which is a comedy club in Queens.
Cool.
That's no longer there. It's now relocated to Austin, and has pivoted to. Well, I'm not going to get into too much of.
Let's just say
the politics of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. We'll just leave it at that. But I was mentored by Marcus Parks, who is the producer of Last Podcast on the Left.
Cool.
And so I was assigned a bunch of shows, and that was really, like, I would say, where my career started.
Yeah.
It was great training, whether I had to just edit shows, be a producer for shows, and then also just starting to get comfortable being on mic.
Yep. Is this like 2012-ish?
Playing with comedians. Well, let's see. Like I've done the math kind of recently. So when was 11 years ago?
Mm-hmm. There's no way to know.
I can't do the math.
Well,
2013.
We'll have to go to some scientist or something, see if they can help us out. So 11 years ago from now, there's no way of knowing when that is.
Right.
You're doing this internship at this place in Queens, right?
Mm-hmm. Comedy club.
Yep, comedy club. And how long do you do that era? How long's that been era?
For about a year.
Cool.
And then I basically like auditioned to be part of a UCB digital team.
Cool.
So, UCB's bicoastal theater, or bicoastal, New York, LA based theaters. They also had, at the time, a production company where they were producing a lot of like YouTube content, also doing like some IFC stuff.
Do those digital teams still exist? I remember when I was dipping my toe in that world, I remember that being kind of a big thing.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's still a thing. I would imagine so.
Maybe the content is still on YouTube.
Yeah.
I'm not certain. I have no idea. I mean, because again, since those days, it's changed ownership.
Yep.
Even a lot of the podcasts that I made, because basically what ended up happening is I was auditioning to be involved in this digital team where we would produce like sketch videos, and it was going terribly. And I just knew that I had to pivot. Like I was not going to get asked to be part of this team.
Yeah.
So I was like, you know what? This is going bad. But instead, what I want to say is I also would be interested in making podcasts for UCB.
What was going terribly with it?
It just like I didn't have the right kind of experience as far as producing video.
Yeah.
Because at that point I had really pretty limited experience in that realm of production.
Mm-hmm.
And I just felt like, the vibe, I wasn't vibing.
Yeah.
Just, it was not, I could tell it was not going well.
Mm-hmm.
I was nervous. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I pitched them like, I would love to, I've been doing this for a year now at the Creek in the Cave. I feel very confident I could take on and launch this on behalf of the company. And a few days later, they asked me to start out small and just like make a couple of shows. And then I ended up doing that for like 3 years.
Wow. That's a big chunk of time. Are any of those pods still around, or like, do you run into any of those hosts to this day, or was it all just kind of in that time period?
I've seen those hosts around for sure, like at comedy shows, and some really like very, people who have gone on to be really like successful and prolific were involved. Like I did an improv show with Michael Caine Cruz, who is a writer for Colbert.
Cool.
And his co-host was Natasha Vainblot, who is a writer for Fallon.
Wow.
And a really accomplished stand-up. Like, yeah, I worked with really cool people. We also did a show called Long Form Conversations, UCB Long Form Conversations.
I remember that.
It was like improvisers talking to each other about the craft and their process. And I mean, so many like huge names that have gone on to do all this great stuff were like guests on that show. Josh Sharp. I'm trying to think of like UCB names. I mean, I at this point am pretty out of that world, but
so you did that for 3 years.
Brendan Mulligan Lee.
Yeah, Brendan Lee Mulligan. Close.
Or whoop. Sorry.
Give you a mulligan.
I mean, he's doing just fine at his like with his MSG appearance coming up. Like it's okay if
you're
I
really
mess up his name. It
screwing
doesn't
that
matter.
up for him.
Yeah, exactly.
That's cool. I didn't know Brendan was on the East Coast too. So with that, are you engineering and editing? Are you doing like all the roles with that? Like, what's your position in that world?
I literally did everything.
Yeah.
I at some point I think brought on like an intern in New York to help me out with engineering some of the shows.
Yeah.
And doing a lot of the editing. But I like for the first year, I think I want to say I was probably producing by myself 5 shows, 5 weekly shows.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it was awful.
I've done a few of these episodes now, Ben. Every person I talk to who has been in the game for a little bit has that exact experience of when they were dipping their toe into early podcast production. I don't think anyone has had like, and then I was just the producer or just the editor or just the engineer. They're doing all 4 or 5 roles simultaneously, which is kind of wild because, and I think it says something about how green podcasting was at that time. And part of what I loved about it was able to, I think got me more excited about pursuing that than like TV writing or something is because it was so green, you were able to like try out recording and editing and producing and booking and all of these different parts of it in a way that I feel like when people are starting out now, they kind of get put into like a very specific, like you're starting as associate producer. And then from there, you might go from producer and then maybe they learn a little bit about engineering or editing. But it's just funny how many people like 7 years ago when they started were responsible for all aspects of production with only like a year of, or less under their belt. Pretty intimidating. Yeah.
But it was also freeing.
Yeah.
In that there were no guardrails. Like, I mean, I worked too much. I worked like 60 hours a week for like no money.
Yep.
But I think on the one hand, that with this change you're laying out of like how people are coming up, it must be really nice to feel like you have clear guidelines of what your role is.
Totally.
But it also is so hard right now to like just launch a new show.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of pressure to, I think, to perform at a certain level.
Yep.
And I think there was a lot of excitement in those days because it was so nascent. You could just like kind of play around, like even just be more experimental in sound design and I don't know. It was just like I think very fondly of those times as much as it was basically constantly having no form of support whatsoever.
Yeah. The last like 2 new shows I've worked on in 2023, 2024, and new shows that I'm working on in 2025, the amount of pressure on the launch is bigger than anything in the last like 7 years of other shows that I've worked on, there was definitely an element of, like you said earlier, less programming, less competition. And so you didn't really feel the pressure. There was almost like an excitement of like the promo in 2016 was just like a tweet. And then like that was the launch, was just like a single post on social media was for a lot of shows, like their entire launch strategy, and how, much it's changed in the last like 4 years, probably specifically, is wild. And yeah, definitely kind of takes some of the fun elements out of it, of just releasing, recording something, editing it, and then posting it and see what the world thinks. There now has to be so much more like thought put into it. But what was nice about that time for people like you and me is we were able to record, edit, and release so many new shows in a way that I think is harder to do today, in terms of specifically like a successful launch that gets X amount of downloads. You can still record, edit, and release shows, but it's just more likely today that it like gets kind of lost in space, where now you have to have like this huge plan and stuff. So I kind of think fondly back on the days of recording something and being like, what if we release it tomorrow? And then just doing it. Was pretty fun.
And I mean, I was also just happy to be there.
Yeah.
Because this was also a time of where there was, of course, the great pivot to video.
Yes.
Where every media company, everyone was just putting all of this money into producing video content. That was going to be the big future, right?
Yeah.
And of course, we all know that crashed.
Yeah.
But at that time, all of my friends who were involved in video production, they were all like, why are you doing what you're doing? Like, there was a period of time where I really remember people, like, it was like laughable to them what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have that same experience?
Yeah, there was definitely like butting heads in 2015, 2016 about releasing video, and some people being like, kind of like old heads being loyal to like, this is podcast, it's not about video, it's about audio. Like, you're removing the intimacy by adding video elements. But then there was the other side of it, which was you could get away with lower quality video in live streams because people, not all, but people weren't expecting it. So for like a year, we would do this show I worked on called Who Charted. We would do it on Facebook Live from my phone on a tripod every week for like, I think like over a year. And then I think we would just like post that on YouTube. Like, that was the video element. Other shows having like higher quality setups, they like looked really good. They still get hundreds of thousands of views to this day. But that then created a pressure of like, these episodes now have to hit really hard because there's now a video cost that is a lot more expensive than the audio cost. There was, and I'm not really saying anything out of pocket because it's been discussed publicly, but there is this company that did video stuff for Earwolf before I started, and they offered to do it for free. They were just like huge fans. And so they would do like 3 camera setups and stuff, and it looked incredible. And I
remember this.
Yeah, they shortly went out of business because they weren't not charging. But yeah, then it crashed. People were just like, I don't want to. And maybe it was like, I don't think it was just like an Earwolf specific thing. Like, hosts, not all the hosts, but some of the hosts were like, I don't want to have to do like hair and makeup to record the podcast. What I like about it is I can just show up, feel comfortable, record with my friends, and leave. The video is kind of adding a new pressure that is not what I signed up for with podcasting. So it did get enough pushback that some shows tried it out and liked it and tried to integrate it. Others were pushing back more. And then it just was like around, 2017, a lot of the shows were just like, okay, we're not going to do that anymore. maybe we'll get like a selfie video of someone promoting something, but for the most part, we're just going to do audiograms, which is, as you know, but maybe some of the viewers don't, is just the clip with the waveform that has like the subtitles. So that became almost all social clips on the Earwolf side, and for other networks as well, was a sound bite with the moving waveform was it for socials. But other people jumped in on it pretty strategically, I think. I don't know.
It was a weird time because also I'll add too that like you're talking about like the podcast side, but I'll even say like I think I was speaking even more broadly of like when Facebook, the algorithm, do you know what I'm talking about? Around like video content.
Yeah.
Like that, I think too, there was just like so many of my friends who were freelance video editors and a lot of the people in just the scene that I was in, the comedy scene, I felt like were very judgmental about me pursuing podcasting at that time.
Yeah.
And I just always reflect on it because of course, like then when all of that kind of crashed and burned, it was like actually this like gift to have been involved in such like in the early days and have this kind of head start so that I had gained all of this like valuable experience and years of like, you know, of portfolio to point to.
Totally.
So that I was now positioned in this way where I'm like, wait, I'm in this like, I've landed in a career. I never thought of it really that way.
Yeah.
I was doing it more as just like, I'm pursuing comedy. This is a way to do a little performing and to make a little money and to feel like I have a comedy job, you know?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it became like, wait, this is a career that I could really actually pursue.
Yeah.
I very much felt like I fell into it.
It was, and something you said earlier too really resonated with me of it kind of also became an excuse to hang out with cool comedy people of like when I was interning at Earwolf and like taking pictures and stuff. At that age, I was just like, wow, any excuse to sit in a room with these extremely funny people, I'll take it. So that was a very fun element of it as well. But yeah, the whole video discussion, to what you're saying, like in a bigger sense, was really interesting. I was on a sketch team at UCB at the time, and we, there was always this discussion about, I don't want to say reverse engineering ideas, but like taking an idea and then saying, would this be better for the stage or should we film this? And then the filming conversation would monopolize then that became a whole conversation, and it kind of became this like at times reverse engineering success instead of just like what do we think is funny and then just kind of sticking with that. It kind of became a weird discussion when like Funny or Die and UCB digital and podcast video and stuff. When all of that video content was being introduced, it kind of felt like a lot of people were trying to jump into those fields and then maybe like reverse engineer ideas to be as big as they can in those fields, which I don't know. I don't really miss. Like you said, though, I'm grateful for. I learned a ton, but it kind of also could create an environment where all these funny people are flipping ideas in a way that was like, I don't know, kind of odd, I guess.
Yeah. And I mean, it's not really, it's all always been chasing virality by going viral.
Yep.
It's just, it's kind of always the ecosystem is ever evolving, but at the end of the day, it's kind of like people are always trying to just hit that mark. And you're right. It's so often reverse engineered versus like making something cool that you like and then putting it out.
Totally. So you're doing the content for UCB.
Yeah.
I'm guessing this is like 2013 to 2016-ish. Where do you go from there?
So I want to say that of the shows that I worked on at UCB, Blank Check was one of them.
That's surprising. I didn't know did they start there in the UCB world? Wow, that's cool.
Yeah. So it was always a movie podcast. The idea, though, before what Blank Check is now, it actually even had a different working title. It was just called Griffin and David Present. Really original, great title.
Great.
And the premise of the show was David Sims, who's a critic for The Atlantic, and Griffin Newman, actor and comedian. They decided to do this bit where they, for 10 episodes, talked about the Phantom podcast, that was what I don't even know what we call the subtitle. The supplementary title was called The Phantom Podcast, but the bit was they would discuss The Phantom Menace, Star Wars Episode 1, as if it was the first movie and they had never seen any of the other movies before. Wow. So it was like they were discovering Episode 1 for the first time.
Wow.
Yeah. It was a real, let's commit to the bit to a point where it isn't funny, but then it actually, you keep doing it enough that it becomes funny again. It was like that kind of idea.
Yep.
And so then, of course, after 10 episodes, we kept discovering there was another movie, and so we did, I think, 30 episodes.
Wow.
Of that until we decided on this premise that we now do as Blank Check, which is we pick a director's filmography and we cover their full body of work going movie to movie each episode.
What has been of those filmographies, has one of them been, I don't want to say the easiest, but was one of them very smooth and then was one of them extremely challenging? And if so, which?
I mean, there's been this also when you do a show for a really long time.
Yeah.
It just changes because you change, the host change, the world changes. So I would say the smoothest time for me was definitely the peak of the pandemic. That's when it was just really fun.
That's really interesting. Are you being serious?
No.
I was like, wow, you got my ass there.
Yeah, no, that was my favorite time.
Yeah, the world was horrible. The audio was a nightmare, and I was having a blast.
And I loved to argue with people about why they needed to turn their air conditioner off.
Yep.
It was really cool.
And get negative feedback from the host and fans equally. And
no one was happy.
No one was happy, and being overworked and not paid any additional income for it was awesome.
Yeah. Smooth sailing.
Yeah.
No, okay. I would, even though he's been talked to death, his work, Christopher Nolan, and that was also, I would say, maybe our fourth or fifth director. So it was still kind of early-ish into the show.
Yeah.
But that to me just felt like a time where we really found our voices.
Yeah.
And I started to implement some of the sound design bits that have continued to be a part of the show. And I think I started to kind of figure out a little bit better what my role was as an on-mic personality. And I think we were really hitting our stride.
Yeah. During your favorite era, peak pandemic, I subscribed to the Patreon for a few months and was going through you guys did a Marvel run where you watched a bunch of the Marvel movies. And I appreciated your on mic contributions a lot because, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they would get so like in the weeds. And sometimes you would ask kind of like an outsider's question of like, okay, so when they're doing this, like, you know, what does that mean for the cinematographer and stuff? And then they would have like a great answer for it. And I, as someone that knows a fraction of anything in your world, and especially Griffin and David, I really enjoyed that. Like, I don't know, I felt like you were like part of the conversation and like an important part of it, but sometimes we're like asking questions that I think were helpful for, I don't know, people that are like not inside baseball movie fans. So, that was fun for me. Yeah.
And that's very on purpose.
Yeah.
I feel like I've always tried to bring a perspective that is not a huge movie dork.
Yep.
Like, I want to make this show accessible. And I think it's important to obviously serve the audience that really gets the deep cut. And I also know, having done podcasts for a really long time, that people are attracted to that authenticity. But you need to also really like be aware of the experience that a new listener has coming to your show.
Yeah.
And you, like, every episode, you need to like make sure that they can get on board. And so I always tried with our Patreon and our main feed show to always try and keep that in the back of my head, and to be curious and ask questions and feel comfortable even sharing my, being open with like, I don't understand this thing. And I'm willing to put that out there publicly and not feel shamed, and instead be like, hey, this is going to be something that I can learn and also will be helpful for our audience.
It's really smart. And I think big picture, it helps. I was thinking this week about show accessibility, like what you're saying of, you know, working on a show that is like famously inaccessible. How do you take something like a Hollywood Handbook or a show that has so much like lore and bring in new listeners? And so, you know, Apple Podcasts is kind of, and probably Spotify have like created options now where it's like preferred episode or like intro and stuff. And so I see people experimenting with like adding trailers to their RSS feed and to their like YouTube channels and stuff as kind of a like start here. I was always jealous of publications that would write full pieces on a podcast that would be like, your introduction to My Favorite Murder. Here's 7 episodes to start with, and would very clearly like write out something like that. And I think some fans have, but yeah, it gets to a point where, if you almost like, I don't want to say address it, but like if you don't do something like that, it becomes harder and harder to do. So I think that's very smart of you to provide like an outsider's POV. But then like another thing that's interesting about our role, there was this big Reddit post today about a similar discussion point, is the very blurred line of producer and how very quickly it becomes an on-mic role. And, some people like it, some people don't. How did you feel? Did you immediately feel comfortable being on mic, or was it a like you didn't want to and they were encouraging you? Like, what was your experience? Like we discussed, like what you were saying, what was your comfort level as you were beginning to talk more and more on the show?
So I had mentioned earlier in our conversation that I was pursuing comedy writing and performing. So I had
That's true.
enough experience at that point doing stuff on stage. And my approach with all of the different shows that I worked on is I was always open to contributing.
Yeah.
But I didn't have to.
Yep.
I always really wanted to establish with any of the hosts that I was working with that I'm comfortable doing this. I'm totally down to participate, but I'm not trying to come across as there's just like a line that I felt like I didn't want to step over.
Yeah.
So, so I the way that I got involved being on mic with Blank Check, Griffin and I had worked on a show when I was at the Creek in the Cave. It was a Chris Gethard public access recap show. So I had already done some like stuff with Griffin on mic. And so when we launched the show and we're recording our first episode, we didn't really have that much of a conversation other than just like what they were planning to do for that episode. And we talked through like that aspect of the content. But at some point, Griffin just brought me in without really any kind of like heads up.
Yeah.
And I kind of just got thrown into it and just riffed and felt okay about how it went. And I feel like from there, it just kind of, they would just like kind of bring me in to just like throw out a joke or pitch a silly idea or even just share some kind of observation or feedback.
Yeah.
Which then led me to actually then after that point to start to kind of prep or just have something in my back pocket. So I would say I wasn't hesitant, but I was never really clear exactly. It took some development to get to feeling really reassured of like what my role is and what I'm doing.
Yeah. Yeah, same. And it feels funny how that specific role is never laid out explicitly of like, okay, and as the producer, you will also be on mic whenever we throw to you. That's just like a thing that like organically happens. And I've seen it with other shows where they try bringing some people in, vibe's a little off, then they're a little less on mic. Other people they bring in immediate chemistry, then they bring them in whenever, and just having that as like an option is like a nice, backup for the host. If, and part of that too, I imagine you felt is like, there's just like the sense of trust between the host and the producer in those moments is like, even if they're good on mic, if there's not like that kind of foundational trust, they're probably not going to like want to have them on that much. So I don't know. There's this level of like hanging out with the person too that adds another level of it. Anyway, that's really interesting. So you're working on the show. You've been with them since the UCB days. What you do these 30 episodes. At this point, or I guess I should say, at what point do you feel like the show really starts to take off? Is it immediately? Is it like a certain year into the show or a certain episode? Is there a moment where you're like, wow, guys, this is really hitting?
We were like, we've got 5,000 listeners.
Yeah.
Like we're killing it,
yeah.
Like, cause that felt like something,
Totally.
in a week of release, we've got 5,000 listeners. And I think we had built in the UCB community and whatever very scrappy kind of marketing, like one person promoting another person's project, and having some of the podcasts, like the flyers for the shows, playing on the theater monitors before the live shows would start. And there was these little ways that I felt like the show was starting to just get a word of mouth following. And it helped too that Griffin and David both had an established base of followers on Twitter. But I would say creatively, when I felt like we were really starting to hit our stride, is when we would shift between doing Phantom Menace episode 1 into Attack of the Clones episode 2.
Great.
I want to say. I might be wrong. No, yeah. We would do a little palate cleanser.
Okay.
And of course now I feel like totally like showing my ass because, and I'm like so biased with my answer, but I would pick the movie.
Sure. That's fun.
Which was, and I still get to do it from time to time, but yeah, it was called The Ben's Choice. And I think the first movie that we did, and of course, like any like super deep cut blank check fan who's watching this is probably like, you're wrong. Like, I don't even remember my own show, whatever. I've done like 700 episodes. Okay. So like, I'm sorry if I like don't really exactly remember. I think I want to say though, our first Ben's Choice was Under Siege 2.
Okay.
Steven Seagal movie.
Sure.
And it just was like really fun. And because we were able to drop the bit and just like riff on talking about this ridiculous movie. And it just was like really, really funny. And I think that was even maybe the first time we got an AV Club write-up, which of course, again, like that was such a thing then, you know,
it's cathartic.
to get that.
Yeah.
It was like huge. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was for that episode.
Wow.
But that was definitely a moment where I was like going to my the leadership at UCB and like being like, hey, like we're getting press, the audience is growing and the show is getting better. Like,
yeah,
this is justification for you guys to continue to let this show keep going.
are you guys doing ads through UCB or
no?
So you're just doing the show for free?
Yeah.
Wow. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how most, probably 95% of podcasts start. But that's very cool. Just doing it for the love of the game. And you're getting write-ups. You're getting to contribute movie and episode premises. They're doing very well. And you're still doing it through UCB East or whatever it's called, the East Coast UCB, New York. At what point do you guys go to Audioboom? Is it shortly after? Sorry if I interrupted mid-story and you were about
it's okay. And so I'll just like quickly add too, just because I so rarely get to talk about this period of time.
Great.
That
yeah.
At some point, I hired a LA-based producer to run those shows. Because at some point we expanded the UCB podcast network to start working with LA-based talent. And that producer's name is Cody Ziegler, who's gone on
Cody.
to great success.
Yep. Cody
doing
was
all
at my
kinds
wedding.
of really cool things.
I didn't know Cody
nice.
worked on Blank Check. That's awesome. Very
well. He more took on, he took on my role, but in LA, where he
That's right. Yeah.
was working with a bunch of like different performers
Matt Walsh
in LA,
and I think Ian Robb, like some of the UCB4's podcast at UCB and stuff. I remember before he got started at Earwolf was doing a few shows with like Dan Black and a few talented improvisers in LA. That's cool. I didn't know that those worlds were connected. That's awesome.
And I think at our peak, we were maybe doing 12 weekly shows.
That's fucking crazy, man.
Yeah, it was crazy. And I was working 70 hours a week.
Yep.
But like, I actually will not publicly state what my salary was.
I know. I was trying to guess it.
Let's just say it was like
started with a 5.
No, not even. Yeah, we can't play this game.
Yeah.
I refuse to, like, let's say it was lower than 5.
Okay.
I was like,
good for you, man.
living in a windowless closet.
Yep.
30 years old.
Yeah.
Like, it was rough. But I always knew, like, and my parents would be like, why are you doing this?
Yeah.
But I was like, this will pay off. And I got a headhunter reached out to me on behalf of the company you mentioned, Audioboom.
Yep.
And was like, we love your experience and you should come in for an interview. I got the job offer. It was a real salary job with health benefits. And I just was like, as much as I love what I'm doing now, I can't pass this up. I need health insurance. At that point, I had like not gone to a doctor in like 5 or 6 or 7 years, like hadn't been to a dentist in so long. So I took the offer, and it was really weird, sort of like, because I was so ingratiated into the UCB podcast network. It was so a part, like my baby that I'd really like grown from nothing, that it was, sad to go. And it was just, weird transition. But my new boss at Audioboom, I presented to him basically like, I've been working on this show. Griffin and David had said like, hey, we love working with you. If there's an opportunity at this new company, like, let us know.
Cool.
And so it just really worked out where we had banked up enough episodes that once I landed at my new job and we started the conversation, we were able to make the transition seamless. So we just released our last, episode that we had recorded at UCB, and then we're able to just like jump in on the Audioboom days.
Wow.
With no real like pause with our output.
I imagine that was a pretty huge transition for you guys. Do you remember that time specifically? Any sort of like network change, I feel like, is always huge for a podcast. Did listenership change at all? I imagine feedback was positive, or just like, okay, maybe they didn't really have any hot takes, but what were the like big differences you noticed during that transition, if there were any?
Well, we had, for the first time, a real studio, like a real nicely professionally designed studio in Midtown.
Yeah.
And it just opened up the door for inviting bigger guests. We, for the first time, had a marketing budget.
Crazy.
There was somebody at the company who was spending money to get the word out about our show.
Yeah. Really quick, with the recording during the UCB days, was that in like a green? Did they have like a dedicated recording room? I imagine they didn't have a studio, or were you guys just doing that at one of your places those early days?
So New York City is famous for being really expensive.
Yep.
And everyone's apartment is tiny. Right. I had mentioned I at that time was living in a windowless closet.
Mm-hmm.
The UCB production offices were at the training center.
Okay.
In sort of like a little corner of this big annex. And then within the production offices, there was like a big, I guess you could call it like a sound stage where they shot a lot of the sketch videos and web series and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were the editing offices and, you know, where all the staff was, you know, their workstations were. And then I was given for my recording studio a utility closet.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, I don't even know, like it was like you could basically just fit 4 people in the room and a small computer workstation.
Sure.
So it was like a tiny little room.
Brutal.
But it was soundproofed and it was mine.
Yeah.
But I would record all day in a windowless closet, and then I would go out and then come home to a windowless closet.
One jail cell to another.
Yeah.
So you go to Audioboom, you have a full studio. You got a marketing budget. I mean, I bet it feels like I don't want to say rags to riches, but it probably feels like a culture shock.
Oh yeah.
Do you have like a guest booker now as well, or is that a thing?
We had a booker.
Wow.
Yep. And I had always been kind of on my own island. I mean, I had like a cohort in Zig in LA, and I had some interns that I worked with closely while at UCB, but this was the first time that I was actually like working for a company devoted to just podcast production. And I just felt like that was where I really got the industry training, like how all of it works. It was a shock though. I definitely also didn't feel pressure necessarily to start performing at a certain level. Like it was indirectly, but I was aware right away, like, oh, we have to make this work. Especially because we, for the first time now, are able to start making money doing ads. And so that was like I would say it was shock in that it was almost like, wait, this thing we've been doing for free that's fun has now gotten really real.
Yeah.
Like, and this is like, the performance of this is kind of representative of like me as an employee to my boss, because he's like kind of taking a risk on this weird thing. And so like, I really have to make this work, you know?
Yeah.
So I would say that was kind of, that stands out to me as the pressure I was feeling somewhat from that transitional period.
Yeah. There's definitely like a financial pressure once the ads get introduced as well. At this time, does the show launch a Patreon, or is the Patreon a couple years into Audioboom?
It's maybe like a year in.
Yeah.
We started it. I'm going to try and do this without looking at my phone. I think we started it in 2017.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah. Yes.
Is that an instant success, or does that slowly grow over time for you guys?
Well, it's so funny, and I think you and I have even talked about this. It's so funny now how everything has changed for new shows, or even just shows that have launched in like the last 5 years. It's so funny to me how like you've never heard, like, it's like you've never heard of this show before, right? You listen to like their like second or third episode, whatever, you know, and at the end they're like, and check out our new podcast episode, or sorry, our new Patreon episode, where we're like going into we're doing a deeper look into, or whatever, you know. Yeah. But it's just like, it's crazy to me how now shows, what's become ubiquitous is they like start with a premium feed.
Yep. They launch with a Patreon.
And it's like, what I feel like the people who are doing this aren't appreciating is you're basically asking to do more work and not really make a lot of money.
Yeah.
Because you need to grow an audience. And you also have to like, I mean, I think the thing we did with like waiting as long as we did to eventually launch a Patreon is we wanted to really build goodwill with our audience.
For sure.
Exactly. Yeah. So that when we did launch, people were, you know, excited by the idea of it, right? Because our Patreon feed is a little bit different than our main feed in that the premise is we do live commentary. So the idea is it's kind of like, you know, on a DVD or Blu-ray or whatever, you could watch along with like a director's commentary. We're providing that same kind of thing, but it's us. And you can sync it up at home or just listen on without the movie.
Yeah.
But I think people were just excited to support us.
For sure. Whereas if you had launched doing the UCB show and then announced the Patreon, people might have been like, who are these guys? Like, why would I pay for this? I just started listening to it. But like what you're saying, something we've talked about is shows launching with zero pod credibility being like, and check out the Patreon. And you know, it's because they saw some other show getting, you know, $600,000 a month. So they're like, well, I got to do that. And it's like, well, that's not really how it works. But
and also what it's always the trend too is that the premium show is like loose.
Yeah.
Because like they only came up with one idea, which is the regular show that they've put out. Yeah. And then like the premium show is like less thought out. And you're like, well, yeah, like, so what are you messaging to your audience? For sure. To pay for like you guys just fucking around?
Yeah, hanging out and stuff. Yeah, it's the same thing.
I can swear on this, right?
That's the show. Yes, you should.
Fuck.
Handbook.
I just love when people ask, can I swear on this? It's like, what the fuck are you talking about? What is this, radio?
It's like, so insane. There is one show that I listened to. 7-second delay, like. And I feel bad because it's Waveform. We've talked about, I think, this show, Marquez Brownlee's tech podcast, Waveform. Have you ever seen clips of it? It's really popular on YouTube. It's through, I think, Vox Media or something, but they do beep the swears. I don't know why. Maybe they're trying to get a bigger audience with like the tech friendly world. And so they had on this guy who I really like. His name's Raleigh Williams. He's like a climate activist, great YouTuber. I had coffee with him a couple years ago, super cool guy. And he got to do the show and talk about tech and like climate science. And he swears and then says that, like, is it cool if I swear? And they lie and say yes. And they beep out him saying fuck like 50 times throughout the episode. And I felt so bad for him. Like,
that's so crazy.
Why did they do him? Like, they should have told him. Or
he wouldn't have swore then.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
He would have cleaned it up so much. And, or just like, if you can't swear, give the person a heads up. Like, just so you know, we beep the swears. But yeah, so many like people that do comedy podcasts. Is it okay if I swear? It's kind of cringy. Anyway, Handbook had the same thing, and so did Action Boys, where it was like, and Action Boys isn't even its own show. I mean, there is like technically a free feed, but Gabrus was doing High and Mighty for years. Rogers was on Hollywood Masterclass and Comedy Bang Bang a bunch. Stanger was doing Dumbbells. So collectively, they all had a ton of podcast experience that they were bringing when they launched Action Boys. Same with Flagrant Ones. is Sean and Hayes were doing Handbook for years. Carl was on A Million Pods. Those shows don't have successful launches without 5 years under their belts of goodwill with their audiences. And so now when you see like new celebrity pod launch and the Patreon bombs, it's like you didn't earn it, you know. You need to build a little more trust with your audience before introducing paywalled content. It's pretty interesting. So,
there's this and there's something to that, and I don't think we should get too much in the weeds, but there's something to this medium where your audience and you have this really interesting relationship.
Yeah.
That feels genuine, right? Mm-hmm. And I think just launching a premium show and it just being like, well, no, this is just this thing that you can pay for if you want it. Mm. Like people can see right through that.
Yeah, 100%. And then also like what you're saying, knowing your audiences, I think we've both have benefited from being Doughboys adjacent in that our audiences are aware of what Patreon is, where shows I've worked on and other shows just in general that have bigger audiences than anything I've ever worked on, their fan bases are not as familiar with Patreon. So there's was a learning curve with other audiences of like, what's the Patreon thing? And then doing like an intro to Patreon episode. And then people being like, oh, I get it now, which is something I took for granted because like with Handbook and Action Boys and Blank Check and Doughboys, all of those audiences are familiar with what Patreon is because they were introduced in 2017 to those audiences, not 2024. So yeah, it's just kind of an interesting study in the audiences, basically. So you're with Audioboom for a while, right? 17 to question mark?
2020.
Okay.
2019, sorry. So 2 years.
Why did I think it was so much longer?
I don't know.
What were you, and then you guys have been independent since then?
Yeah.
Wow. I thought it was with Audioboom.
I want to share one of the other
please.
shows I worked on when I was at Audioboom. I launched and worked on Snooki from Jersey Shore's podcast, famously.
Amazing.
When I was at Audioboom. And Nicole is really wild. Like she's a great mom. She was always really nice to me.
Yeah.
But she like would come into the city from Jersey to our studio, and her co-host was her gay best friend, Joey. And they would just let loose.
Cool. Like
drinking Prosecco and just like kind of wilding out. But it was pretty surreal having some like celebrity guests that I like for me meant nothing, you know. But like Leah Michelle. We had the Situation on right after he got released from prison.
Great.
Yeah. I'm not going to go any further other than I got to really like spend a lot of quality time with Snooks.
That's awesome. That is a weird part of working with a network, which could segue into another thing I want to ask you about, which is the Spotify world. I have this with Earwolf. I have it a little bit with HeadGum right now. Is the network experience opens up odd opportunities like that, where you work with people that you probably never would have worked with. I produced Nick Offerman and Megan Mullally's podcast in bed. And so like one day I'm just doing my normal bullshit. And then 2 weeks later, I'm like setting up microphones with a bunch of like Sam and Brett and a bunch of Earwolf engineers, like literally in their bed. Like that doesn't happen without Earwolf. And so that network experience is really fascinating because and especially as podcasting continues to grow, agents and managers get more aggressive with pitching their talent to host a show with a network. What else was that experience like for you? So around this time is when you have like a brief stint working at Spotify. Do you have a similar experience to that as like Audioboom, in that another kind of interesting network gig where you're working with a bunch of hosts you might not normally have access to? What's that transition like for you?
So I continued to participate in Blank Check, but really just working like in a creative capacity, and really like had to kind of hand off all of my production duties.
Sure.
But while I was at Spotify, I got hired to produce Amy Schumer's podcast. So I was recording in her home, and Bridget Everett was one of the co-hosts, and Rachel Feinstein, and Keith Robinson. So working with these like really big personalities, and she would get like huge guests on too, like had Quentin Tarantino on, and Michael Moore.
Crazy.
Like huge guests, like Michael Moore.
Rock stars.
Rock stars. Yeah, total rock stars. And so that experience, though, working at Spotify at that particular time, which is I got hired late 2019 and then worked there for probably about another 2 years, but all through the pandemic. That was a crazy time for that company because Spotify at that point had already acquired Gimlet, had acquired Parcast, and I think shortly then after I started working there, had then also acquired The Ringer. So they just spent a ton of money and were basically just going all in on pursuing podcasting. And it was insane. It was hard to really get a grounding on what was happening, because it felt like leadership kept turning over, the strategy kept changing, the data people kept saying, you have to actually shift to this strategy based on the data that we've been able to pull. Like it just like, it felt like no one really knew what we were doing. And it was just like, it was just like everyone was like a chicken with their head cut off running around trying to like find success. But there was no clear even, there was nothing to point to that actually was what you were working towards. Like what was success? Because also the like expectation that was being set by TV executives who then like moved into podcasting is they were like having these like insane lofty, numbers, like analytics that they wanted the shows to hit that just like were never going to happen. It was a total mess. It was really, I had never really worked in a corporate environment like that before, like a big corporate environment. And it was, really hard. I don't feel like I ever necessarily settled in.
This is around when we met, and I remember we would chat and it would just be like, I don't think I was probably in the early stages of thinking about leaving Earwolf, but we were both having kind of wild network experiences. Yours much more extreme than mine.
Because you guys had been acquired by Sirius.
Yeah, like I think we were about to, like that acquisition was, I think, the end of 2020. Or the end of 2019, maybe. No, end of 2020, because it was during the pandemic. But yeah, similar thing of like, billion-dollar companies getting involved, fearing the like control of content in a way that was not there before. What's interesting about like Spotify during that time is they've since throttled that back, the amount of like millions that they still throw millions at host, but I think they're much more strategic about it now. At that 2019, 2020 era, it was a lot of like, we're not 100% sure what we're doing, but we have so much money, so let's just keep putting a lot of money into certain areas until one of these hit, which is when you start to see like the Armchair Expert acquisition, the Joe Rogan acquisition, these like
Call Me Daddy.
Yeah, like these massive shows getting so much money. And then the other thing, and then we can stop talking about this, might be too in the weeds, that was interesting to me about it was these shows being Spotify exclusive, which you understand why they would do that. However, it starts to, it starts to backfire. And now these shows are not Spotify exclusive anymore. You can listen to them on any app. But it was kind of interesting seeing that, like, oh, this is a $75 million deal, but they're going to lose 30 to 40% of their audience because there's going to be a third or maybe more of their audience is not going to make that move to Spotify. So that was very interesting too, of almost like the blue sky approach of just like, let's just keep throwing money at stuff and we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
But you're exclusive to Spotify. And then after several years, I don't know if maybe it's like host and a combination of like host and fan complaints that they eventually just go like, why don't we just say this is a Spotify show, but it is now available on all platforms, which I think was a good move. But it was just fascinating watching Spotify at that time. I feel like every newsletter from 2019 to 2023 was about some crazy Spotify deal or people getting fired or drama and stuff. So super fascinating for you as someone starting in like the UCB podcasting world, then moving up to Audioboom with Blank Check, then still working with Blank Check, and then working at Spotify. I mean, you've had like such a fascinating career trajectory, experiencing all these different network and freelance experiences. I don't really have a question there. It's just kind of like, isn't that crazy that you did that?
It was like, I've seen it change a lot.
Yeah.
And I've just been invested in this medium in a way that I feel passionate about it. And I have I'm really like thankful that I fell into this career, and I have a lot of faith that it will continue to thrive. But yeah, I mean, even just like, I don't revisit thinking about that time because obviously the world was in a terrible place for a number of different reasons. But that was also a time where it felt like it was really the first time that all of these big media companies were starting to pay attention. And there's so much money getting thrown around. And there was almost this moment of, on the one hand, it was like my uncle and my aunt were like, oh, we get what you're doing.
Same.
That's, wow, that's incredible. Like, that thing that I mocked you about like 5 years ago, like now I get it, right? So it was like I was having that experience. But I also was like, watching the company that I was working for like making all of these different decisions, and just like investing so much, and all of these other bigger giant conglomerates investing so much, and it just started to really make the whole ecosystem just feel really unstable. And it was kind of like, it went from being exciting to scary.
Yeah. I think part of it too is like you kind of quickly realize there's literally nothing you can do you're just on the Titanic. Like you're like, you can't even pretend to be the captain. You're just like, well, I make really good grilled cheese on the Titanic, and that's all I'm going to do is like, I'm going to make the fuck out of these grilled cheese. But you can't control the ship in a way that's like, of course you can't. It's like a billion-dollar company. But that was kind of an interesting part, and why I wanted to like step out and go into the freelance world was I didn't like fully just losing control in a place. And then when host had, accurate negative feedback, I was just like, yeah, all I do is make the grilled cheese. Like I can't really help you with that stuff. But I agree with you. So it's kind of fascinating being in that role where you realize all you can do is the things you're good at, and any sort of bigger things are just fully out of your control, which I understand is what most jobs at companies are like. But
I feel like you and I are similar in that I think we both recognized that we didn't need these companies.
Yep.
And I mean, they're all these big companies really all have dialed back, pulled way back on their investing. And there's been a really like industry-wide effect where a lot of like our friends, former colleagues, like have been not in a great place, like there's consequences to these to how leadership at these various massive companies handled things. And so that, with that said, it really just motivated me to be like, I'm just going to do this myself.
Yeah. Same.
Like we're independent. We're completely self-sufficient. We set up our own studio space in Brooklyn. We invested in buying equipment. We have someone we work with doing our ad sales, and we have our Patreon, and I'm just going to devote myself to this one show because we're at that certain level, and I'm going to really like bet on myself.
Yeah.
And I feel like you similarly made the kind of the same decision, more or less, of just like, you know what, like I can do this myself.
Yeah, I feel like it was, and maybe similar to what you were saying with learning a lot from UCB and from Audioboom, and maybe some like industry things from Spotify, a similar thing of learning everything I needed to know at a network, and then at a certain point going, I want to apply all the things that I know and do it for myself and no longer do it for this other place. And so it's interesting because I think we're both fortunate in that both of our main shows started, between 7 and 10 years ago, where they had, over that time period, developed and established a strong fan base that has followed them from various networks. Obviously, the biggest with like the Patreon. that is so much harder to do today. I think it's just so, I don't want to say scary, but it's just so intimidating, and watching, people pitch shows that have to go through all of these hurdles and hoops in 2024 into 2025 that I know, like, 7 years ago, this just would have been handed to them. And like what we were saying with Spotify too, of like, networks would just give, whoever a crazy amount of money for just saying like, yeah, literally whatever you want. We're just happy to have you. Since then, it being throttled back so much and being much more strategic is the nice way to put it. Laying off thousands of people, probably the more accurate way to put it.
Yep.
It's just fascinating watching this new era of shows come out that is way more careful with the way that they launch shows, basically. But I want to circle back to what you were saying about a thing that you and I have both connected on in the last year, which is basically building our own setups, which has been super wild. I know you and I have spent a lot of time probably in message boards of sound paneling and curtains and carpeting and quiet air conditioning mini splits. Can you tell me a little bit more about that experience for you of like independent studio building, basically?
Yeah, we struggled to find a space because we were initially looking in Manhattan.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about commercial space in Manhattan, because there still continues to be post-pandemic an abundance of commercial real estate available on the market.
Mm-hmm.
It's never really rebounded, especially in Midtown. It's just so many companies like just pivoted to working from home, and so there's always been a glut of availability, and I forget the exact like figure, but it was like, let's just say, I don't know, I'm roughly saying like 80% of the buildings, commercial buildings, were all built at a very particular time. And so they all had like 12-foot ceilings. Every single office space that I was looking at in Manhattan had giant high ceilings.
Wow.
And it was just this standard.
Yeah.
And so we didn't have the money to invest in like really doing it like a proper, like putting down a real budget on like establishing like an infrastructure for that kind of space. So we kind of ended up with like somewhat of a compromised kind of office space, which it was location wise perfect for us. It's in Brooklyn. It's a again, I don't know what is with me with windowless spaces, but it's a windowless box.
Yeah.
But ceilings aren't as tall as a lot of the spaces that we were seeing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really quiet building. And we our approach to soundproofing was, I was initially going to just invest in like putting up a bunch of panels.
Mm-hmm.
But talking to a friend who works more in the music side of things, but like owns his own studio and does a lot of recording, he recommended that we invest in purchasing a big velvet curtain on one wall.
Yeah. That's what HeadGum has.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, so not like, I didn't go to school for recording. Like, I'm not going to even pretend here to like talk about the science of it, but it's like, we have this one wall in the space that absorbs a lot of the sound. And it's really, on top of the fact that we are using these Shure mics that are pretty ubiquitous, that I feel like are, very focused range.
Yep.
So it's not like you're getting a lot of room sound or you're getting a lot of reverb or anything, especially after we run the audio through various filters and whatnot. And then I decided, when I was like designing the space and thinking about how we were going to use it, we had kind of two use cases. We had our regular recordings that we did with a guest usually. And then we also had our Patreon, which the majority of the content that we're putting out on there is we are watching a movie and recording along to it. So we needed to be able to potentially reposition the space, reposition our desks in a way so that we could all have a conversation while watching a movie. And we had invested in a projector. And so basically I decided, instead of paying thousands of dollars for like a giant desk that you find often in recording studios, there's like furniture makers that make stuff specifically for that type of purpose. And paying the added, shipping, and then having to deal with working with the building to like schedule getting a time where they could take it up the freight elevator and then assembly. I decided instead to make the room more modular, so I bought just 4 sturdy separate desks and then positioned the room where we're still, we have more control over distance, which is great for sound bleed.
Yeah.
And we're able to move the space around when we need to use it for different purposes. Even like Griffin occasionally uses the space for rehearsal, for like, other projects and stuff he's working on, outside of the podcast. Sometimes we'll clear out the desks and do little screenings in here. Cool. And we have like folding chairs. So it's worked out where we would have had this big bulky piece of furniture, but instead have a lot of more flexibility with this approach.
It's so fascinating how a huge part of, I feel like both of our jobs, like there's a period that's like the design brain in a way that I've never had to really think about. And that's definitely like a privilege of working with a network that had professionals figure all that stuff out, but was just a thing I took for granted of like, oh, there's this table and the microphones and a couple panels, not really thinking about how pros spent 100 hours thinking about all of that stuff until I wanted to do it myself. Then it became a very, and as someone that is like renting this space out and recording shows in here was, I don't live by a lot of people. And so this is a little bit of a drive for folks. And it was like, well, I need this to be worth it for people because they're not going to want to drive, for 45 minutes and then go like, it was okay. Like if they're going to drive out here, it needs to be really nice. Otherwise they'll never want to come back. And then so that design part of it becomes like a huge, if it doesn't look good, no one's going to want to come back. They're just going to go like, okay, I did it, and then leave. So, it's kind of an interesting part of it too, is you want it to not only feel practical so that the audio sounds really good, you're set up for, like what you said, like for screenings and have the projector and having like video capabilities, but you also want to set it up for comfort so that the talent wants to come back. And I feel like I have seen people lean maybe too much into one and too much of the other. A studio space that's maybe too comfortable and not practical enough, and a studio that's too practical and not comfortable enough. Some places have like kind of a good middle ground, but it is everyone's taste kind of comes out when they're building it of like, oh, okay, this is, everyone's comfortable, but it doesn't look good. Or, this looks really good, but everyone's really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
a lot of trial and error with that.
Well, you've done an awesome job. I was so impressed. I got to
Thank you, man.
see your studio. It really, like, I love the way that even you just like the colorful like panels and all of that. I think it's like really great job, the custom desk and all that.
Thanks.
Yeah. And I think, you had to kind of figure it out on your own, the video component of it all. And I'll just say for us, like, Blank Check, we're not pursuing video at this time. So I didn't even have to use that part of my brain when thinking about how I was going to lay out this space. And you're right. I find that there is kind of like the more like it's a radio show kind of look that I think is better for audio, but isn't necessarily, unless you really invest a ton of money in a lot of different cameras. And even then, sometimes it still just cuts together weird.
Yeah.
That kind of like radio, studio kind of vibe versus the more like, this is a talk show. And yeah, you're right. Like sometimes it's like, they obviously are talking into mics, but they're like, we're in a living room.
Yeah.
We're just hanging out in a living room. And there's like something about the presentation of it, even just that, like, and it's really only when you're watching it. When you're listening, it doesn't matter. But when you're watching it, there is something about that presentation that just like feels different.
Yeah, it establishes like the mood of the show in a big way.
Yeah.
I got a ton of help from this guy, Wesley Knapp, who does stuff for a lot for Forever Dog, specifically Tim Heidecker's show. And he helped a lot with the cameras and the lights. And one thing that he said, because, I was just trying to get a bunch of advice from like YouTube as well, like other people that have done this. And I found this one guy who I really enjoyed who was like, have this camera for your center and then these other ones for your single shots. And so I was telling him this, Wes, and he was like, why would you do that? He was like, why would you have different cameras they should all be the same camera so that when you're cutting, it all matches. Like, and I was like,
Totally.
oh, okay, well, yeah, this guy said that. And he was like, you could do that. I would recommend that they all match because, you can get them very close, but when you're cutting back and forth, you will notice a difference if you're using different cameras. And I was like,
Totally.
Man, that's super helpful to know. I'm keeping you super late and we haven't even started Podcast Simulator. Before we get into it, are there anything that you think I missed in our chat that you wanted to like jump back into? Any other topic points or like Patreon stuff that I missed?
No, that was fun. I felt like I rarely get to go back and talk through that trajectory.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed like just getting into even the early days of it all.
Me too.
It's like, yeah, it's a real reminder of like how much I feel like I've been on the ground floor of this thing.
Yeah.
This thing that I've now made my like full-time career, and done it on my own terms. And it feels awesome. So
It's super cool, man. It's very impressive.
Yeah.
And thank you for sharing all of that. I love chatting pods with you. All right, let's jump into Podcast Simulator. Let's see how this looks/works. So I'll try not to waste too much of your time with it. But basically what I did, Ben, is I created a made-up podcast for you to produce. And there's just a few different scenarios that I will run by you. And I wrote this thing that I like saying, at the beginning of these, which is, Ben, as you know, sometimes things out of our control can sabotage us. That's just the nature of the job. But how we react can dictate our future. And with that, let's begin. Today, you will be producing, engineering, and editing the movie podcast Hold for Sound. let's look a little bit about the show. I'm going to zoom in here so that I can read it because this is a true eye test for me. This is about the movie podcast Hold for Sound. Dive into the world of overlooked cinema with legendary action director Blake Thunder and podcast icon Frank Kane. Each episode spotlights a niche movie that the hosts have not seen and discuss if it deserves more love. From the forgotten cult classics to hidden indie gems, this is a podcast for true cinephiles looking to expand their watch list. So I kind of view this as a little bit of a, like, for lack of better terms, like over the plate movie chat show with one person who's like a pro in the,
right.
Director, and then another person who has just a lot of podcast experience. I have found that is like a good recipe for success.
Sure.
Each bringing their own audiences. What do you think about producing a show like this, Ben? What are your thoughts?
So, to even just jump off of what you're just saying, they're both bringing their own kind of authenticity.
Yep.
I'll say too that picking and spotlighting niche movies can kind of go two different ways, right? There's
That's
two
true.
ways of thinking about it, because you could cover instead pick like really popular movies, and you're potentially going to be able to draw more audience over. But there's also, you run the risk of, like, if so many other movie podcasts have already talked about that movie, then why is anyone going to want to invest any more time into something they've already been able to engage with, like on 5 other, 6 other, 20, 50 other shows.
Yeah.
Right. So I think there is something to be said about spotlighting niche movies. You're potentially going to, also maybe have audience discover the show because they're into that niche movie, and it's the first thing that pops up when they're searching. And it's also just like, oh, I've never engaged with the show that's covered a movie like this movie before, so I'm going to check it out.
How much time do you guys spend on this part of Blank Check? Are there discussions sometimes where it's like, you want to cover a movie, but then maybe one of the other hosts or you or someone else says like, oh, this movie's been covered to death. Like, I don't think we should, I don't think we should say it. Well, I don't think we need to cover this.
A lot of time and thought goes into the curation.
That's cool.
It's like, I would say one of the like major parts to our strategy.
Sure. Yeah.
Because we're always looking back at who we've done and making sure that we're trying to just really have a variety.
Yeah.
Even just like, I guess, this past year we finally did a foreign director.
Mm-hmm.
We did a Japanese animation director. His name is Satoshi Kon.
Mm-hmm.
So we're always really trying to make sure that we're like keeping things fresh.
Mm-hmm.
And even like we're doing David Lynch right now till the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to launch with a new director and went about picking someone that we felt like would be just a real departure from that Lynchian kind of voice.
For sure.
So a lot of thought goes into how we go about selecting what films we're talking about.
It makes a lot of sense because if you take a step back, I don't think Blank Check is as successful as it is today if like that's a part that you guys phone in. You know what I mean? Like if that was just a thing that you guys were like, whatever, let's just do this. You would run into so many future issues that it makes sense that it's a thing that you guys are very, careful and spend a lot of time on so that you're setting your future self up for success. So that's very cool.
It's like, this is very obvious and kind of stupid example, but I'll just share it. It's
Great.
like, if a DJ is bad at picking music, why would you like want to like be around that DJ?
Yeah. 100%. That's great. Let's look at your role. It's pretty straightforward. A thing you and I have both done a lot, the 3-pronged approach: producer, engineer, editor. So with this, perfectly segueing into what we were just talking about, you pitch movies for the host to discuss. They're obviously going to be discussing that as well. You're going to prep the host with some research about the movie, schedule the recordings, working with the network on ads for the show, growing the thing, and then you're also responsible for recording and editing the show. The show does not have video, provides a booker, marketing support, ad support. Pretty over the plate here. Any initial thoughts, or all sound groovy to you?
All sounds groovy. I mean, the research side of things is, that is like something that we were doing ourselves in the early days, and at some point decided it was worth investing in bringing outside help. So I haven't had to take that on in a long time.
Yeah.
And, it's, I'll just say it's like something that actually, depending on the dynamic with your hosts, the expectation of your hosts, that's not necessarily just like, oh, here's like a 1-pager. Like that could take up a lot of time.
Yep. 100%. And I think this part specifically changes pretty wildly from movie podcast to movie podcast. The amount of like prep and research that goes into these discussions. So let's begin. This is called Pilot License. For the first episode, you book a major guest, Ben. Nice job. You got Daniel Day-Lewis. Pretty big guest.
Huge.
However, his team should have given you a very important...
I call him Dan.
Okay. Dan is reprising his role of Abraham Lincoln from the award-winning film Lincoln for a prequel called Little Lincoln. His team did not give you a heads up about this. For most of the interview, Dan as Lincoln acts very confused by the questions. He repeatedly asks what a podcast is, how are movies made, and what are those earmuffs on their heads, their headphones. The hosts are unsure if this should be released at all, and they go to you. In this scenario, Dan, do you release this episode or do you not release it?
I release it. Absolutely. This is someone committing to the bit so hard. You have to put it out, of course. And what you do is you can't, though, make Dan look bad.
Yeah.
Right? Because as a producer and as an editor, your job is to always have empathy, right? For put yourself in someone else's shoes. You don't want to make Dan look like an idiot, right? So you want to make this weird, his like obsession with being method, right? You want to like really showcase his commitment. And I'm suggesting, depending on how it all plays out, you add sound design, maybe you put a filter on his voice to make it sound really old timey, like maybe every time he talks, there's like a 78, even like an Edison, what are they, those like spindle things, the really early recorded format. Kind of add that every time he talks, just like you're going to
lean in
this kind of messy, weird, recording session, and you're going to take out all of the awkwardness from the hosts and chop it up in a way where it just makes it try to make them sound as natural. And then you're just going to really like lean into this bit and try and find the funny moments. And who cares if the interview didn't go the way that you wanted, as long as it's entertaining.
Yeah. That's a great headspace. And I think very much also showing your comedy upbringing, your best show, Tom Sharpling, like influences of just like leaning into the crazy, like embracing the unknown instead of backing away from it. So totally. Ben is choosing release it. Let's see what he gets. For better or for worse, a lot of people will listen to this episode. You get a B from the host and an A from the network. They're happy that you released it. I think the hosts were a little like hesitant of like what was going on, but there's still, I'll just spoil it. If you had chose don't release it, you would have failed the scenario. So you've survived the first scenario. And I think, yeah, that's a great like lesson learned of the, and to bring it back to my circle is the most popular handbook episode was the Triumph of Comic-Con, which is like a live show that bombed so hard we flipped it and did commentary as if it was the greatest thing we had ever done. Had that show had gone well, this wouldn't have happened. Like it just would have been like a live show we released and just continued doing it. And so that was an example of like taking something that, did not go as we thought it would and then reacting to it and adjusting to it and making something fun out of it. So nice job, Ben. Let's go to the next scenario. I don't know why this is in white, but this will be a good vision test for me. After the crazy recording with Dan, DDL, you and the host have agreed to do a few episodes without guests. As you head to the studio, you notice that should see Shay, TWO. 2, the number 2, major issues, way too late with the next movie. Number 1, you did not know the film you watched was a remake of an original. You did hours of prep on the wrong movie by accident. Number 2, the film is no longer streaming anywhere, so listeners don't even have any way that they can view the movie that's being discussed. So as you're heading to the studio, Ben, what do you tell the host? Do you just say the second one and inform them, hey, this is no longer available anywhere. I think maybe we should consider rescheduling. Or do you be completely candid with them and cop to both and say, hey, just so you know, this movie is no longer available. Also, to be completely honest, I did research on the wrong movie.
So your literal job is recording people communicating.
Yeah.
And if you're not being upfront and communicating to your hosts, then what are you doing? Because of course, like not telling them and then what? Showing them, giving them like the wrong research, that would be so bad. That'd be crazy. Yeah, cop to both.
Ben, with a strong moral sense, cops to both. You apologize to the host and explain the issues at hand. Both were by accident, but you're obviously embarrassed. The host kind of laugh it off and agree to rescheduling with another film. So you get a B- from the host and a network grade of a B. I think this is like a very real scenario of accidentally fucking something up and just being completely honest in the moment. And I don't know, I feel like I look at a lot of problem solving in podcast production as, does this hurt me in the future? And sometimes it's like, hey, I'm going to have to do this awkward thing right now, and it's going to be embarrassing, and I'm going to have to apologize about how I messed up. But in the future, I won't have a different issue, which is like in that scenario, maybe you just, you do a white lie, but then like, as Ben pointed out, then you get to the studio and then it kind of gets quickly revealed like, oh, you did all the wrong research. So I don't know. I'm a big fan of just being completely honest in the moment so that you don't have to deal with other issues later on, whether it be an hour later or a year later. Just, help yourself out in the future, basically.
Totally.
Cool. Let's go to the next scenario, which is called Growing Pains. Each episode is better than the last, Ben. The show continues to grow, and with that, you receive more and more flashy names to guest on the pod. You mostly stick... I have so many typos in this, I apologize. You mostly stick with not having guests on, but every now and then is a fun one for the show. So, you record a great episode with the action star Nate the Skate O'Malley. A few days after the recording, with Nate. An interview with him goes viral. He's quoted by saying, "I don't really get why these people below the line complain so much about not getting paid more. They get to work with me."
Whoa. Come on, Skate.
You haven't released the episode with Nate yet. The hosts are a little hesitant in this scenario, Ben. Do you still release the episode, or do you just go, you know what? This ain't the look.
Right.
Let's can it.
Yeah, so this is an action star. It's a big get. I don't really know exactly how he did on the recording, but now it's basically like he's viral. He's going viral right now.
Mm-hmm.
So on the one hand, it's like you could be kind of craven almost, right?
Mm-hmm.
And take advantage of that increased attention.
Yep.
And I mean, what he's saying is he's just being a total asshole.
Yep.
But then at the same time, canning the episode, censoring yourself because you're afraid that your association for a session that you recorded
Before this.
with this person before this even happened is somehow going to like reflect on you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in some ways it does because you're putting it out in a public way.
Mm-hmm.
This is a tough one.
I know.
I mean, it's like, and the other thing too is it's like canning an episode is like the last thing you should do.
It's not fun.
Right? It's like, because what are you going to re-record it with the new guest? Right?
It's kind of
like,
tricky.
You've burned
with
that
this.
movie.
I know.
You're basically like, there's no going back.
Yep.
So it's basically, you're like deciding like that thing that we spent all this time on,
Mm-hmm.
we're just never going to like release. Although, you know, there is of course like canning it for now and then eventually putting it out.
Yep.
Wow. Yeah, this is a tough one.
I love putting my guests in moral conundrums on a live stream.
Yeah.
What's my
I'm glad.
What's my damn problem?
Yeah, what you're making me look so bad. I don't get it with these people.
No, I love it. You've
Complaining
you've
so
come in
much.
solidly on the last two. I finally got you on a curveball here.
No, I mean, all right, I'm going to just make a decision.
Yeah.
I don't really get why these people below the line complain so much about not getting paid more. They get to work with me. I'm going to release the episode.
Yeah. It kind of
He's being a dick, but whatever.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like if he said something really derogatory, then I'd be like,
Yeah.
no way.
Yeah.
But like, he's being a dick.
Yep. Yeah. Release the episode, Ben says. You get a little backlash for releasing this. Some fans call you out for having him on. DDL retweets your episode with the quote, "To remain as I am is impossible. I must die or be better, it seems to me." And that's a quote. He says, me, parentheses, Abraham Lincoln. So the hosts give you a B for handling this, and the network is thrilled.
So what did he think what did he think a tweet was? Like, did he think he scratched it into a fucking tree?
Oh, man, that is such a tough follow-up question that I did not think about. Maybe.
Did like his assistant be like,
That's what it is.
what
Yeah.
say you, sir? And then he like put it into a carrier pigeon and then they translated it from there or something. But continue.
That's what it should be. It should say, DDL's assistant, this is what he said.
Transcribed from a carrier pigeon.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So you passed. You got
All right, good.
Yeah, you did. And now we're on to the final scenario.
Cool.
Damn it, it's in white again.
And it's
Host
Blake Thunder.
Yeah, that's the host name. I don't know if I said that initially.
Oh, right.
Host,
No, you did.
Host Blake
I
Thunder wants to record the season finale on set of his new movie, Pin Drop, a high-stakes action thriller about a shipment of defective grenades that end up in the hands of soldiers during a critical mission. After recording the season finale, someone on set thinks your Zoom H6 recorder is some sort of bomb for the movie. When you go to the bathroom, you return, and your H6 is being placed next to several grenades. Action, you hear Blake yell. Ben, what do you do in this moment? Do you run on set and do you grab the H6, or do you leave it and just see what happens?
Wow. Okay. Well, it's not real grenades because it's a movie.
Who's to say?
But, okay, I guess you're right. I suppose there's like, directors like Christopher Nolan who want to like, have an explosion look as close to a nuclear bomb as he possibly can.
Yep.
So right. These are real pyrotechnics. And, my options are like when I grab the H6, it's like I'm running into the like scene of a Hollywood movie starring my host Blake to retrieve this, not even that expensive device, but of course it has the
SD card.
The master recording, the SD card. But I would say that it would suck to have to re-record, of course, right? And it's likely that this bomb will go off and destroy the device and destroy the SD card. But I think the level-headed thing to do is to just leave it and not put yourself in harm's way.
Yep.
And not risk pissing off your host because this guest that he brought on set is like running into the shot.
Very interesting. Ben's going with leave it. Let's see what happens. You watch the grenades go off, exploding your H6 and SD card holding the audio from the recording. You guys later record an episode about this happening, and it ends with the footage of the H6 exploding. This is somehow bigger than if you just released the original episode. And so, Ben, with this choice, it actually becomes a huge success, and you get an A from the host, and you get an A from the network. And I'm excited to share you won podcast scenario, Ben.
Holy shit.
Every choice you made allowed you to enter the next scenario. You didn't pick a single scenario that caused you to fail and lose. And also, people who have watched have noticed I haven't really figured out the back button. And so this might have just abruptly ended. I see there's one here, but not every scenario has the back button. You can see it's grayed out on here. So you made it to the absolute end of Podcast Simulator. And you mastered producing, engineering, and editing the podcast. Hold for sound. That's everything, Ben.
That was fun, man.
Thank you.
That was hard.
Yeah.
Those were good scenarios.
Thank you.
I think you designed them in a way where, especially the last two, I had to really talk it through.
Yeah.
And it's obviously coming from a place of like, you're the one who wrote these and you've had a lot of years of experience of knowing all the various things we have to deal with.
Yeah. And I like thinking it through the lens of you specifically and like, what's a show you would like to produce? What's bizarre scenarios that you would have to go through? So I'm glad you passed a flawless victory, as the chat has pointed out. Thank you so much for doing this. I know we went super long, but
no, man, it's all good. This was so fun.
Is there anything you would like to promote for people that are watching in the stream to go check out?
Yeah. I would, I mentioned Blank Check enough, but I have a clothing brand.
Yes.
Called Congratulations.
Oh my God, we didn't talk about that at all. I'm so sorry. Yeah, everyone should go check it out.
You can go to congrats.com.
Yep.
Got a bunch of stuff there. And I'll say it now for the evergreen, the archived version of this. I also every year put out a Christmas holiday, a compilation album of holiday covers as well as originals called Slow Christmas.
Great. Yep,
and
that's right.
It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a bunch of songs performed really slow.
I love it.
So you can listen to the one coming out in a few weeks, Slow Christmas 4. It's got some really great people involved. And there's already, 3 other albums you can check out today.
That's awesome, man. You do so much creative stuff outside of podcasting too. I really enjoy it.
I try, man. Yeah.
It's very cool.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. Thanks everyone for watching. And I will be back next week with Anya and Casey from HeadGum. We'll be running them through the podcast simulator. And not streaming on Thursday as it's Thanksgiving, but I will see everyone next Monday. And have a good night. Bye.